stop me. So, but guys, we are back. We're back with another NSE4, review section. So the last section we went over was logging basics, right? We went over a lot of things, right? They talked about the log workflow, identifying log types, subtypes, log severity levels, the layout of a log message in the CLI, and of course in the GUI as well, and the effect of logging on performance, right? We've seen, right, the workflow. We talked about how, how traffic passes through, action is taken after looking at the firewall policies, that, after, the action is taken, right, the activity is recorded, right? And then that log message is stored in a log file, right? Either locally on the FortiGate or an external device, right? Or a FortiNet analyzer, right? Or a logging server, external logging server, right? And we talked about the purpose of what logs are, right? It's to monitor network and internet traffic, right? Diagnose issues, right? And establish normal baselines to recognize anomalies and trends, right? And so we've seen the different type of log types, right? Log types and subtypes, right? We got traffic logs, we got event logs, and we have security logs, right? We have all of these things, right? And we're going to go ahead and take a look at that in the GUI, right? We looked at and we learned about log severity levels, right? 0 being the most highest importance, right? And of course, being emergency, and 6, right? Or 7, sort of say, is the low importance, right? So, and we talked about a few operational things that are not inside their study guide in your book, as far as, we want to make sure if we're going to use something like debug, we have to make sure we're using it for an absolute reason, because of course we can overburden the CPU, okay, with all those logs. We talked about the log message layout, right, within the CLI. Mykevia last time, she asked a great question. She says, what command we would use to see the layout as such. We're going to go ahead and do that today. I'm going to try to attempt, theoretically, go ahead and produce this in the CLI so you guys can actually see the log header, the log body, right? And you can see these different things that are pointed out, right? Okay. We talked about logging in a sense of within a security fabric design, right? You guys learned about what a security fabric is in the past, right? At its core and its foundation, it is 2 FortiGates and a Forti analyzer, right? We have a root FortiGate and we have, of course, one of the branch FortiGates, right? We'll call this a scope, right? And then we have that Forti analyzer. We talked about how, the different methodologies we can use to go ahead and log that information, okay? Right? We talked about what protocol is used to send logs, right? That FortiTelemetry protocol, right? So keep that in the back of your mind, and again, we'll take a look at that after we are finishing the lab, right? We talked about the effect of logging on performance, right? And just like I stated before, right? The more logs that you have, right, the more CPUs that's utilized, right? Along with more memory and disk space, right? So you have to be very specific, right, on what logs you want to keep, what logs you want to store on your hard disk, your archive settings, or what have you. You want to make sure you set all these things, right? So this is just a little review, just so we can go ahead and make sure we got it under control. So now that we went over that, right, let's go ahead and first talk about local and remote logging, okay? So a couple of things that we want to go ahead and achieve, right, whenever we're discussing local and remote logging, right? So one is to go ahead and identify log storage options, right? We're going to go over that in detail, right? Another one is enable local and remote logging, right? We can do that by the CLI or the GUI, okay? We're going to go ahead and talk about, understanding the breakdown, right, of disk allocation and reserve space, right? We're going to talk about how remote logging works with VDOMs, right? Right, and that's mostly VLANs for firewalls, for FortiGate firewalls, so to say. So we're also going to go ahead and talk about log transmission, Okay, we're also going to talk about reliable logging, right? You guys heard about reliable transport protocol, right? Well, you have reliable logging, right? Where you can securely, right, and reliably, of course, using TCP, can go ahead and send logs to your external log server, right? You can do all of these things, right? So let's go ahead and jump in, right, and talk about this theory. And after we're finished talking about this, we're going to go ahead and jump in the lab and review and emulate, right, producing traffic, right, looking at the logs within the GUI, within the CLI, right, within a simple network, and just look at all the things that we've covered so far. Okay, so right, so log storage, right, storing logs on the FortiGate, right. It's known as local logging. Boom, real simple, right. You can go ahead and select the setting and say, hey, I just want to save all the logs on, this device's hard drive. You can do that, right? On the specific hard drive per se, you want to go ahead and do it on the, mid-end to high-end FortiGates, right? And so, right, so logging to, right, and I want to make sure I got the terminology correct. Logging to a hard disk is known as disk logging, right? And depending on the model series, disk logging may be enabled by default, right? So maybe it's a 200 series, maybe it's a 300 series or a data center series performance level FortiGate. It probably has a lot of RAM, a lot of hard disk space, right? And so it probably is enabled by default, okay? But we can change those settings, okay? But the core thing I want you guys to take away from this is that, you can store logs locally, which is called, of course, logging to a hard disk drive, right, or a hard drive, right, that's local on the FortiGate, which is called disk logging, okay? So key thing to remember, right, we spoke about it before, under heavy log usage, any logging to a FortiGate, right, if you log to that disk, it will result in a performance impact, okay? Right? What do I mean by that? Right? So if you're using the local hard disk to go ahead and save logs to that hard drive, right? And maybe a specific feature that you have enabled, SD-WAN, right? That's used for, of course, WAN optimization, right? And you want to make sure you're tracking, right? You're tracking certain things from SD-WAN. You can, in a sense, right, degrade how your SD-WAN, how the SD-WAN daemon works within that device because the device's resources is being bogged down by logs. So you have to be very careful, right? Very careful if you just and make sure you set your settings right to make sure, hey, if I'm going to log locally, what I need to do, what's my limit, if alarms need to be sent or what have you. You need to actually understand what you need to do, and it actually also can affect traffic as well. As far as passing in and out, your UTMs that's supposed to check all your traffic. So be very wary of utilizing local storage. Okay. Here's a little excerpt, of course, on how you're going to go ahead and store those logs locally. We're going to go over that. So it has, like I tell you guys all the times, you can do it locally, or you can do it. You can do it through the GUI, or you can do it through the CLI. But I'm not going to go in depth, right? Because I'm going to show you guys this within the lab. Okay. So one important thing I want you guys to go ahead and be wary of, and this is my favorite piece because this is where you guys are turning into hybrid engineers, but also hybrid system admins, right? And I love the role of a system admins because they're a jack of all trades, right? And they know a lot about networking, right? They know a lot about security, but they also know a lot about storage, right? And so that is one of the tools that us being network security engineers, right, is going to have to take upon because we need to understand how storage works, right? And so if you do decide, right, you and your company decide to log locally on the FortiGate, right, you have to, right? You have to be aware of the entire disk space, right? It's not available for logs, right? So if you look at here, right, we're looking at the CLI, where we type in diag, right, diagnose, right, short for diagnose, system, log disk usage, right? What does that do, right? We use this command to obtain the amount of reserved space on our FortiGate, okay? So we take a look at that, right? And we see the total hard disk usage, right? Currently, right? And we also have a separate section that's telling us, right, the total hard disk logging space, right? That's reserved for just logging. Okay, right? So we have total space, but we also have space for just logging, right? And so how do we know what's reserved just for logging, right? So you can go ahead and do that formula at the bottom, right? Me personally, I love math. So you can actually do this yourself, right? You don't have to do it all the time. But this is by default how you can allocate and see, if I want to say locally, I can, but I'm going to have to fine tune it based on, creating a baseline for network traffic for roughly a week or two, see how much logs get filled up in my available space, right? And then you'll make your choice if you need to, you can keep it locally, or if you need to go ahead and utilize an external logging server, right? Or an external, disk drive, okay? Now, right? We have a different method to log storage, right? And that's remotely, right? And so if, right, and typically 9 times out of 10, right, storing logs locally, it's not a good fit. It's bogging down the device. Things are being deleted, and we need logs for company requirements, right, for audit purposes or what have you. You can store these logs externally, right? We can configure the Fortigate to go ahead and just shoot these logs out to syslog servers, maybe something like Splunk, maybe some Linux-based syslog servers, or we can use, of course, some of the Fortinet products like FortiCloud, FortiSync, FortiAnalyzer, or FortiManager, right? And the great thing, of course, using Fortinet products to work with other Fortinet products is that with those 4 products that I mentioned, they can also be used as a backup solution, right? They can back up your OS, right? And back up your configuration from your actual FortiGate, right? And just to take a step back, right? Because I love foundation, I love theory, right? Syslog, right? The definition of that is a logging server that is used as a central repository for network devices, okay? And so I'm not going to go down the list of explaining what each offering is as far as FortiCloud, FortiSIEM, FortiAnalyzer, FortiManager, right? I just want you guys to understand, and of course, look at this slide, that there are many options, right, as to logging your logs remotely, okay? Right? And so nowadays, of course, right, most companies, they go ahead and utilize FortiAnalyzer, FortiManager. It's real simple, right? And give me 1 second. I got somebody entering the Zoom. Sorry about that. So they can all work together, right? And so the process, right, to go ahead and configure, and we'll do it at the end of this section, the end of the log section as a whole, is that we can go ahead and configure the FortiGate to send logs to FortiAnalyzer or FortiManager. You do have that option, right? And so the process to go ahead and do that, we're going to go ahead and do that together, okay? And so I don't want you guys to be, harp on this slide, right? You can take a screenshot, you can do what have you, but we're going to go ahead and do this together whenever we set up our lab, okay? All right. One thing I do want to make sure that you guys understand, right, that I know for a fact I may skip over during the lab, so I want to make sure I make a point, right? Whenever you're configuring logging, right, especially remote logging, right, you have the option to go ahead and, select within only the GUI, right? Within the GUI, you can get more granular in the CLI, but mostly in the GUI, I love configuring the GUI, is to change your upload option, right? You can do real time, right? To go ahead and send, as soon as the log is processed, you can go ahead and say, hey, I want those logs to be sent real time to my logging server, my syslog server. Or you can say on a 60-second interval, right? Every minute, or you can do every 5 minutes, okay? And they can go ahead and send your logs, right? Forge your logs as a whole every 5 minutes, every minute, or in real time to your logging server, right? And so you also have a additional option as well, which is a store and upload, right? And just like the option says, right? What it's doing is you have the option to A, right? It's going to store those logs locally, right? On your FortiGate's hard drive. But it's also going to go ahead and upload those logs to FortiAnalyzer, FortiManager, any of those any of your syslog servers that you have configured, right? At a scheduled time, of course, right? So you do have this option. So I want you guys to remember this because you will need to know this for the exam. Okay. And just so you guys know, a real important piece is that the store and upload option is only for FortiGates with an internal hard drive. If the FortiGate does not have an internal hard drive, you can't do the store and upload option. Okay? So remember that for the exam. Okay? So, right? Sometimes, and of course, I've seen it a few times, our FortiGate, ends up not being able to go ahead and communicate to FortiAnalyzer, right? For a multitude of reasons, right? So if the FortiAnalyzer ever becomes unavailable to the FortiGate, right? What will the FortiGate do, right? What will it do? Because it has a configuration there to send logs to that external, right? That external syslog server. And in this case, we're going to use FortiAnalyzer as the example, right? FortiGate, right? Its CPU is going to go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to use this specific process, right, to cache these logs, right? You guys don't need to remember the exact process name. You guys need to remember what it is actually doing, right? What is this process doing? This process is telling the FortiGate, hey, I can't communicate with the syslog server. So until our connection is reestablished, we are going to cache all of our logs, okay? Right? And with that cache, right, and you guys can actually use critical thinking, with that cache, that means that we're storing this locally, right? There is a maximum of how much data can be stored locally, right? So you can go ahead and assume, right, there is a maximum value to that cache size, right? So what happens whenever those logs, right, on Antoine's firewall, right, they're getting, right, they lost their connection to FortiAnalyzer, right, and logs are just piling up. Once that cache hits its maximum, right, it's going to go ahead and start deleting logs, right? Those logs that were cached, right? Of course, it's going to do the oldest first, right? But what if, right, we have almost roughly, 4 to 5 gigs of data being sent, right? Every hour on the hour, right? That's a lot of data, okay? But we need to go ahead and capture that, right? And so as soon as we hit the 15-minute mark, right, the cache, it go ahead and starts deleting. And this is important logs that Twan needs to capture, right? Because it's important for the organization, right? If it starts getting deleted, right, we can have some, operational damages, right? As far as, trying to figure out how the data captured, do some investigation, stuff like that. A lot of things that don't need to happen, right? So you want to go ahead, right? You always want to go ahead and troubleshoot, hop on it, right? Create notifications, maybe increase the cache size, right? Add that external hard drive, right? utilize certain commands to go ahead and troubleshoot, like the command you see right here, right? You can go ahead and look at the process that's being used, mig log d, right? You can go ahead and diagnose and see one, right? The total cache size, right? And see the current cache size. And this is an attempt to troubleshoot, gain reconnaissance of how your FortiGate works, right? You can do that, right? So then you may, right, using your ingenuity, go ahead and put it all together and say, hey, once send me a notification, send me a trap, right? SNMP trap that says, hey, once the FortiGate gets to maybe 50% of cache data, right? Send me an email so I know. You can put all of that together, right? There's of course other commands you can look at as well, right? Diag log kernel stats, right? You'll be able to see, right, that if the queue, right, because there's going to be a queue that is waiting to send those logs to FortiAnalyzer or your syslog server, while it doesn't have connection to it, right? It's going to sit in a queue, right? We'll be able to see that queue, right? And so for those logs that get dropped off, this failed log value is going to begin to increase. So you'll be able to see how many logs has been deleted, right? And so you want to go ahead and use some of these commands, right, to troubleshoot, to look at why your FortiGate cannot send logs, right? Or if there is a communication issue with your syslog server. This is very important stuff, right, for the exam, because they're going to get asked about this. Okay? Any questions? Okay. All right. I'll keep going. So, similar to FortiAnalyzer and FortiManager, right? You can configure remote logging, right, to FortiCloud, right? Typically, if you're working for an organization, you guys will have a FortiCloud account, right? You'll be able to do it in the log settings page or the CLI, right? For the lab that I always create for you guys, I will not connect it to my FortiCloud account, but I can show you guys how to configure it. But I think the screenshot does wonders, right? Of course, order of operations, you have to make sure that you activate your FortiCloud account, right? Everybody can make a free one, right? Make sure that your FortiGate has connection to the internet so it can go ahead and communicate to FortiCloud, right? FortiGuard or what have you, right? Then you can go ahead and set up within the log settings on the FortiGate to go ahead and say, hey, go ahead and send logs to FortiCloud, right? You can do the same thing for FortiSIM, right? Set it up, tell it to send it to FortiSIM, right? You can configure, almost up to 4, right? FortiSIM, syslog service, right? You can set that up within the CLI and go ahead and send those logs, right? You have a lot of options, right? And the FortiGate, right, which is what I love, I haven't seen it on a different firewall yet, you have the option to go ahead and send those logs to a syslog server via a CSV format or a CEF format, okay? Right? And so that CEF format is typically used with the SIEM systems, I'm sorry. So you can configure it, right, as granular as possible, which works for your organization. For the exam, you just need to understand that these two options exist, okay? All right. So, right, sorry about that, guys. VDOMs and remote log, right? If you have a FortiGate, right, that you have split up, right, into different VDOMs, right, you can add multiple FortiAnalyzers, right, and syslog servers to those different VDOMs, right? But you can go ahead and configure up to 3 FortiAnalyzer devices and up to 4 syslog servers under global settings. I'll say it again. You can configure up to 3 FortiAnalyzer devices and up to 4 syslog servers under global settings. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so my favorite part, right, because this is where the network part of the network security engineer part comes in, okay? So let's talk about log transmission, okay? All right, keynote, this is for the exam. I need you guys to remember this, right? To send logs, by default, FortiGate uses UDP. I don't want you guys to focus on the number just yet. By default, it uses UDP. Okay? All right? If you go in and you say, hey, I want to make sure that, and I want to make sure that our logs are sent reliably, right? Meaning that I want it to be sent using TCP, we can do that, right? And that's what it means to send send those logs reliably. Okay, right? Same port number, whether it's UDP or TCP, which is 514. And you guys need to understand that number, right? Real simple. It's the same for both UDP and TCP, but just know the difference. By default, UDP is used, right? If you want to go ahead and configure, you can configure TCP. But you guys have to remember that the port number is 514. You will be asked about that on the exam. Okay? Right? Little excerpt at the bottom, like you guys see, log messages are stored on the disk and transmitted to FortiAnalyzer as plain text in LZ4 compressed format. Okay? Remember that for the exam. All right, let's keep going. All right. So here's a little bit more on reliable logging. And again, I'm talking about logging in detail because you will get a lot of questions about this. Okay. So whenever an engineer, right, they decide to configure reliable logging, right? Like I told you guys in the previous slide, instead of using the default UDP, it's now going to go ahead and switch to TCP, right? What does TCP do, right? It's going to give us that reliable data transfer, right? Doing the three-way handshake, right? Giving us, right? Doing the send, act, right? We're going to get acknowledgments on both sides, right? Whenever data is sent, every time data is sent, right? As soon as you say, hey, I want to do reliable logging, okay? One quick thing to remember, right, is that if we enable remote logging to FortiAnalyzer and FortiManager, reliable logging is automatically enabled. You don't have to do it within the CLI. As soon as you say, hey, I want to set up my syslog and central management to be Manager, it'll go ahead and enable reliable logging. Okay. All right. So one quick thing you have to remember, if you go ahead and enable logs to be sent to FortiCloud, it will use TCP. Okay. You can change the encryption algorithm, right? Which of course I recommend. You guys are network security engineers, right? And of course you guys find out what's best for your organization, right? But you can go ahead and set that encryption algorithm, right? Right. The default setting is set. If you're looking at that screenshot, it's set to high. All right. But it needs to match, the encryption algorithm needs to match on both sides. Okay. So if you have FortiAnalyzer set to high, this needs to be set to high as well. Okay. All right. And so real quick, right, this is one thing that's going to be on the exam, but probably one question about it, right? So you guys are probably wondering what OFTPS is, right? And so I'm not going to get into detail because you guys don't need to know what the acronym is, right? Here's what I want you guys to understand, right? If you are using reliable logging, right, you can encrypt communications using SSL encrypted OFTP traffic, right? What does that mean, right? So when a log message is generated on that firewall, right, it is safely transmitted across an unsecured network, right? So how do we configure it, right? Same command, right? You do the set encryption algorithm, right? And you can go ahead and select OFTP. Okay? With that being said, you guys have completed this section, right? Now I'm actually going to ask 3 questions, right? There's 2 possible answers. I'm sorry, there's 1 possible answers, and I'm going to give you 2 answers after reading the questions. Okay, you guys choose one. All right. So question 1: which storage type is preferred for logging? Is it A, remote logging, or is it B, the hard drive?
Remote.
Remote.
There we go. All right. Question 2: which protocol does the Fortigate use to send encrypted logs to Fortinet Analyzer? And this may be a doozy, right? Is it A, OFTPS, or is it B, SSL?
A.
A.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good job. Last but not least, if Donovan enables reliable logging, which transport protocol will the FortiGate use? Is it A, UDP, or is it B, TCP?
TCP.
There we go. There we go, guys. Well, and you guys just finished local and remote logging. Great job. Now, what we're going to do is go ahead and take a quick second, right? And we're going to walk around, right? The log settings and what have you, generate some traffic so you guys can actually see what that looks like, okay? So let's go ahead and log into this firewall. All right, so log in, right? So we're in FortiGate 1. So let me break down the topology. So build a simple, small office, home office topology, right? We have a switch connected to that FortiGate, right? And we have a PC, okay? And that FortiGate is connected to the internet, right? So we have firewall policy, northbound policy, inside out, that's allowed. Everything else is an implicit deny, okay? Let's go ahead, right? Because the main topic, right, that we're going over is logging and monitoring. So let's go ahead and go to log and report. And let's go to forward traffic, right? Because we spoke about forward traffic, right? This has to do with traffic that is traversing the FortiGate, okay? Right? So we can take a look at this. We actually see this, right? So we see logs, right? And this is, of course, right, stored on the disk, right? On the FortiGate's disk, we can actually see that, okay? We can actually see that. So that's how you identify. You can check here to see, and of course, if we had Fortinet Analyzer set up, there would be a section that says Fortinet Analyzer, okay? Right? But right now, for this lab, we can see that these logs are saved on the local hard drive, right? So we're doing local logging, okay? Right? And so we can take a look at these logs, right? And they'll show us granular details, right? Tell us the time, right? Tell us the date, right? Tell us the duration of that packet's session, right? Because each packet is just a session, right? Right? And it tells us, right, that session ID, okay? It tells us what VDOM or virtual domain it passed through, okay? Right? It tells us the NAT translation technique, right? You guys learned about SNAT and DNAT, right? For here, it's telling us it's using SNAT, okay? Right? And then we get more details, right? As far as, right? As far as that packet, right? What's the source? What's that destination, right? What's the source interface, right? Where did it ingress to, right? Where did it egress to, right? On that destination, right? We're getting all this information, right? Then it's giving us information about application control, right? One of the ETMs, the data that's traversing, right? The action that it performs, right? Security level, right? Telling us the service, and a few other things, right? Can we look at these things within the CLI? Yes, we can. Let's go ahead and take a look. Go ahead and pop this bad boy. Okay. So if we want to go ahead and do that, let's go ahead and do this. First, we're going to do diag, one of my favorite commands to troubleshoot. Debug, flow, trace, start, right? We're going to go ahead and start that first, right? And what does this do, right? That command I just put in, right? It's telling me to trace packet flow within the CLI, okay? Nothing is going to pop up yet, right? Because next I have to go ahead and set up a filter, okay? Right? And so similar to Wireshark, I need to tell the CLI, hey, what I want to go ahead and see, okay? All right. And so for this case, I'll go ahead and do source address, right? And of course, I will get the source address of my PC. Let's go ahead and get that. What I have in this lab is a regular Windows PC. Let's go ahead and get that IP address. Do an IP config. So 192.168.1.100. Okay. Let's go ahead and put that here. Okay. 192.168.1.100. Okay. All right. And last but not least, now that you went ahead and, said for the trace to start, the last but not least, for those logs to start showing, right, where we need to go ahead and enable it, right? One thing I did forget to do, right, is to put a limit, right, on the amount of packets, because remember what I told you guys, right? The more logs that we do, it can go ahead and affect performance. So with the diag debug flow trace start, at the end of it, we have an actual feature to where we can go ahead and set the amount of packets that we want to capture. I'm just going to go ahead and put 10 for now. Okay. Now that we have everything in, right, let's go ahead and start seeing those logs. Okay. So I'm going to put diag debug enable. Okay. So let's go ahead and start generating some traffic. Okay. Okay. Go ahead and do it again. All right. So we have that. We generate some traffic. Let's go ahead and open the browser. All right. Oops, not that one. All right. So now it should be doing it. So we got that going. And I may have forgot one more thing. Give me 1 second. There we go. There we go. And last but not least, all right. All right, so now logs should go ahead and populate. Let's go ahead and give it a few moments. We have that PC. Let's go ahead and just go to Reddit or Wikipedia. We can process that. Right? We have traffic going. All right. All right, so now let's go ahead. Stop it. All right, let's see what logs pop up. Okay, don't see any logs yet. Let me see if we should see traffic flowing. Give it a few minutes. Give me one moment.
I have a question, David.
Yeah, I'm here. What's going on?
So you know how like if when you're configuring the policy,
Mhm,
and you have to enable logging. So if logging is not enabled on the policy itself, I
mhm.
get that it won't show up on like the for log traffics, but would I be able to run this debug command to
Oh,
see it?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because what you're doing, right, is within the CLI, you're in real time doing a Wireshark capture.
Okay.
Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yep. It
Okay.
does. All right.
Okay. And so it looks like, again, sometimes the VM doesn't work right. It's not giving me error. So let me go ahead. Let's do this. Let's go to, because there are additional ways to go ahead and do this. And let's, don't want to do it that way. Let's do that. No, let's capture it. Let's capture that. Stop. Right. So of course, the first way we can go ahead and look at logs, of course, we can do a Wireshark capture, right? You guys have seen this before, right? But I want to go ahead and of course show you guys how that looks in a Wireshark capture. And then we're going to go ahead and compare it to a debug. Okay. Let's go ahead and now pop open the CLI again. Let's go here. There we go. All right. So looks like the logs came in here. Diag debug. Let's go ahead and disable it. There we go. All right. So let's pull this up. And as you guys can see, and you know what? I'm going to make it a little bit cleaner. Let's go ahead and do all this all over again. Let's do debug flow filter. Let's do source address again. 168.1.100, right? Diag, right? Debug, we're gonna do diag debug. What's that command? Flow. There we go. And it's show function name. We're gonna do that. And then we're gonna go ahead and set, right? I want to go ahead and just capture 10, right? I don't want to overburden, right? The CPU. I'll go ahead and set it 15, right? Whoops. Flow. Base. Start. 15, right? And so me putting that in, right? As you guys can see, right? We went ahead and we were able to go ahead and capture that, right? It gave me all of the logs as far as traffic that's popping in. So let's go ahead and read this real quick, right? Give me 1 second. Let's pop this one. Let's go ahead and grab this. Okay. Everybody can see, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, right, we have the log ID, right? Right. And this is, I'm sorry, this is the session ID, right? This is for just a current session, right? We have the trace ID, right? Because we're doing a trace, right? There's many different commands that we can use. I'm just doing this this flow trace for now, because this is the most important one that you guys need to burn into your memory as network security engineers, right? I ask for the function. What is happening, right? It's going to give me, what line does it sit at within the actual log cache, right? Right? It's giving me, hey, what happened? Oh, I received the packet, right? What's the function, right? What's the source, right? It's giving me a source. What's my destination? I'm attempting to go ahead and get to this, right? And at the end of each, it's giving me a port number, right? Right? This is the body. This is the log body, right? It's telling me what port it's source from, the port it's going to. Okay. All right. So we can go ahead and take a look at all of this. All right. Right. And so taking a look at all of this, you can look at the logs in detail. Right. And so what's funny enough is all of this would equal. Let me go ahead and pull up the firewall again. Would just equal just one log. That's it. That is absolutely
Wow, the GUI is much cleaner.
it.
I mean, you can dissect the information, but like at one glance, you can tell what's going on in the GUI.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
What questions do you guys have?
None for me.
Mike,
Yeah, I
you?
can't really think of any actually.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right, guys. Let's go ahead and take a look at what those local logs look like, right? We don't have none yet, right? Because we don't have that much traffic sourcing from the FortiGate for now, right? We have nothing going to FortiCloud or what have you. So we're not going to see any local traffic, but just remember, right? Local traffic is traffic, right? Management traffic that is sourced directly from the FortiGate, not passing through. Okay, right? Sniffer traffic, of course, if we go ahead and create a sniffer port, it's going to tell us what's passing through. Okay, right? We have that event section of the logs, right? And we have all these different type of logs. Mikey, I know you asked last time, hey, is there a log section just for SD-WAN? Yes, there is, right? We have event logs for system events, right? We have event logs for routing events, right? We have event logs for VPN events, right? We have event logs for a lot of things, right? So if you're trying to do reconnaissance, right, gather data, if you're trying to troubleshoot, taking your time in this section actually helps. Okay. Within log and report, right, you also have different logs, right? And these are your security logs. Okay. Remember what we spoke about. Let me go here. Right? Remember what we spoke about right here, right? The last type of log type is security logs, right? These are your UTMs, okay? You got your antivirus, you have your web filter, you have an SSL inspection, right? You have your filters, you have your application control, right? You have your intrusion prevention, right? You have other outside of a UTM, you have any anomalies that are captured, right? Traversing through your firewalls. You have DNS queries, right? You have file filters, right? This is your security section. Okay.
I have another question actually.
Mm-hmm.
I can never differentiate the two between web filter and Fort traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it seems like it's the same information. What is there essentially a difference from the Fort traffic and the web filter
Absolutely.
traffic?
Absolutely. Forward traffic is all traffic that is traversing your firewall. Web filter, right, is your traffic that is going against any rules that are set in your web filter UTM.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I get you. So
So
like when you say all traffic, like in the forward traffic, it's just going to be everything that's traversing the firewall. Okay.
everything that's traversing the firewall, as long as you have logging enabled for specific firewall policies, it's going to go ahead and be picked up by the forward policy.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like the SSL, all that stuff, like the inspections is going to be
Mm-mm.
included. Okay, I see
Nope,
what you're saying.
nope. That's not
Nope.
going to be. That's not going to be in forward traffic.
Oh, it's not.
All traffic that is traversing through the firewall, not in regards to UTMs, that is traversing through the firewall, as long as you have it enabled on your firewall policy, right? I have a northbound policy here. I have an implicit deny policy here. I have logging enabled for both of them. I'm not worried about what security profiles or AKA UTMs that I have enabled. It doesn't worry about that. It's just going to log everything because this is traffic that is going
Okay.
through the firewall. Now, if they, again, and this is, let me bring back up the PowerPoint, that is a traffic log. This is traffic traversing through the firewall. Okay. Security log, right? It associates with security profiles. Okay. And so if you enable a security profile or a UTM under your firewall policy, if there is a condition that is met, meaning it maybe some signature was captured, right? And it's captured, it has an attack or a signature, what have you, it's going to be logged. Okay. And you will see it wherever it was triggered at. So if an antivirus signature was triggered for your antivirus UTM that you enabled on your firewall policy, it will be here. If something was triggered for your web filter security profile, right, and you added it to your firewall policy, it will be shown here. This is your security logs. Okay.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep. So all the UTMs would be like in the security logs. Gotcha.
Yep. And Fortigate, right? It doesn't say which ones are traffic, which ones are event logs, and which ones are security log. You have to know this by, of course, just studying. Okay.
Okay.
Right. Last but not least, let's go ahead and talk about log settings, right? And so I showed you guys, right? I showed you guys, hey, you can go ahead and say, I want to go ahead and log my logs locally, right? We have that set up, right? I can go ahead and disable that and say, hey, let's go ahead and just do remote logging, right? And go ahead and of course, remote logging, you also enable archiving as well, because of course, if we lose connection, right, to our remote logging server, right, we need to go ahead and archive it for a little bit, or go ahead and cache it, right, and archive if the cache gets built up, right. We can say, hey, send logs to FortiAnalyzer, FortiManager. We can go ahead and do it here. Then it's going to go ahead and tell us, hey, what's the IP address of either or, right? It's going to go ahead and test connectivity, then it'll start sending, right? This is how you go ahead and you can configure it, right? This is one way. You can also configure, right? Let me go ahead and change this back, right? And I didn't hit apply somewhere good. You can also configure, right? Logging, right? You can configure that for FortiAnalyzer. You can configure that right here. Or you can configure logging for FortiCloud right here as well. You can configure FortiManager, right? Which of course can act like logging server as well. If you don't have FortiAnalyzer, you can set that up here as well. You can also set logging up, right, within the CLI. You can set up a connection to FortiManager. You can set up a connection to FortiAnalyzer. You can set up a connection to FortiCloud through the CLI. Okay. All right. So there's many options that you have, right? In regards to just logging in general, right? Let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit, right? You can go ahead and say, hey, instead of just sending it to FortiAnalyzer, FortiManager, right? Maybe I don't have those products. Maybe I have a free Linux syslog server. You can go ahead and do that as well, right? You can go ahead and say, hey, put in the IP address. You can go ahead and send logs there, okay? You can go ahead and configure your cloud log settings, right? You can go ahead and activate your FortiCloud account, connect it to your Fortigate. It'll go ahead and send those logs, okay? Right? You can configure all these things, right? UUIDs and traffic logs, right? What is that doing, right? You can enabling any of the following will allow the UUID of the objects to be stored in traffic logs, right? So any address objects that are associated, right? That are associated within those traffic logs that are captured in traffic, right? In those address objects, right? So maybe we have an address object of our internal subnet, right? The UUID that's, if we look in the CLI, that is associated with that address object, we can just include that in the logs. Now, if you want to get that granular, have at it. Me personally, too much info is a thing, right? You can also come down here to log settings, right? You can say, hey, I want to log all the events logs, right? We can go ahead and log all of that, right? Or you can customize it, right? You can come here and say, nah, maybe my Kivia just wants to log the SD-WAN events. She can go ahead and do that, right? Or she can just go ahead, all event logs, you can go ahead and just log them, right? Right here, you can go ahead and log all traffic logs, right? Or you can go ahead and customize it, right? Log allowed traffic, log denied unicast traffic, okay? Log local out traffic, right? Or log denied broadcast traffic. You have those options, right? You also have the option, right, to go ahead and tell your FortiGate whenever it's saving these logs after the packet is right, is processed by the firewall, right? Because of course it needs to log it after that based on workflow. You can tell it, hey, to resolve the host name in that log. You can tell it to do that here, right? You can also tell it to attempt to resolve unknown applications. Of course, it'll require a FortiGuard subscription. But these are all the options that you have, right, within your log settings. Okay, and the same settings are available within the CLI. Does that make sense? I know that was a lot.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
So, you know, take a breather. We have 2 more sections, right, that we need to cover, right? But we're going to take a break from the login monitoring section to cover routing and switching next week. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and start on Tuesday. All right, you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you Tuesday.
All right. Thanks, David.
Later, guys.
Hey,